This morning on the Ag Issues program, a pleasure as always to bring on to the program Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the program this morning. Roger, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Just fine.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. And as we mentioned earlier, we had to delay a week, but we haven't had the chance to finish your top 10 list for important ag law and tax issues in 2024. And they're significant as far as what we saw in 2024, and one that continues into 2025, which I'm sure possibly may make your list in 2025, but we'll get to December and January of 26 to find out. But that is the Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting Rule that was established under the Corporate Transparency Act, and this has gone back and forth and back and forth. And to add to that, you had the decision mandate by the Department of Treasury last week. So take us through everything that has gone on, including last week's decision.
Well, you're right, Greg. This is something that has been on again, off again for several months. What this stems from is the Corporate Transparency Act, which was part of the Defense Reauthorization Act that was enacted at the end of 2020. And it had an effective date on it, which was delayed until that was actually set up in the statute. This delay of the effective date was till January 1 of 2024. Now, President Trump, in his first term, vetoed these provisions. He cut out the Corporate Transparency Act and these Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting Rules, vetoed it. He was overridden by the Congress on that. And in fact, that was his only veto during his first term. And what we're talking about here, these rules require any, and I'll simplify this down because it gets pretty complex, but basically any entity that has to be registered with a government office. So if you have to register your business with the state, then you're potentially subject to what's known as the Beneficial Ownership Information Reporting Rules. You have to report any individual that owns 25% or more of your business, or any individual that exerts substantial control over the business. So your senior officers, your major decision makers, those types of things. So even if I'm a small farming operation in Kansas and I'm organized as an LLC, say even a single member LLC, well, I have to register with the state. Well, that makes me a reporting company, and since I'm single member, I own 100% of it, then I've got to file my information with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Network. So it doesn't go through IRS technically. It goes through the Financial Crimes Network known as FinCEN, which is part of the Treasury Department. So it's kind of like IRS. But here, again, you've got the federal government collecting information. Now, the whole purpose of this, the reason the law was enacted, was to try to get at these entities that are formed overseas and they're used as shell companies, and even domestically formed shell companies. The federal government wants a database of who these people are. Well, that database kind of already exists at the state level. If you've formed one of these businesses and you've registered, you've got to disclose that information with the state. So this is just another layering of regulation. Well, as you know, and as you mentioned, this spawned a whole bunch of litigation as to whether that's constitutional or not. I've always been in the position it is not. That's an extreme overreach because the Congress did not trigger the need to file these reports upon a business doing commerce, which would be your Commerce Clause connection under the Constitution. What they said was if you exist and you're registered with the state, then you have to file, and even though you're not conducting any business, for instance. So the trigger point was wrong. And in fact, one of the early court cases pointed that out. They said Congress could fix this pretty easily, and we're not going to fix it for them. That's not our job. And so they wiped it out. Well, depending on what court you were in and what judge you were before, sometimes they upheld an injunction. Sometimes they removed an injunction, letting the cases go forward. It's never been decided on the merits. It still will be at some point in time. But I had always been of the position that people would ask me constantly, what do I do with this? What do I do? Do I need to file this for my clients? And I would just tell them, No, it's never going to take effect. Don't worry about it. Although I know as we got closer and closer to the deadline, and practitioners had numerous clients that this had to be done for, and some big ones, they needed to get started on it, because if it did, in fact, take place, that the requirement kicked in, you didn't want to be behind the eight ball and get stuck with an impossible workload. So I understand some had to go ahead and do it. But my advice to farmers was, no, just wait. Don't pay the fee to get this work done. And you're looking easily, just some of the basic ones, $300 to $500 to have that work done. Because, look, you're never going to get that fee back. And the government's going to get information that they don't necessarily are entitled to. Well, turned out that was right, because just a little over a week ago, right at the end of February, the Treasury Department in the second Trump administration said, no, we're not going, these rules, no, we're not going to enforce the rules. There are no fines, no penalties, because the fines and penalties could be pretty harsh if you didn't comply. The rules only apply now, Greg, to foreign entities that are registered domestically. But there's no farmer in Kansas. There's no domestic entity that is subject to this rule. It's gone. So that's great news for a lot of people. We don't have to worry about this. It's bad news, and it makes you feel like a chump, I suppose, if you went ahead and did this and you paid to have it done. The government got your information. Yeah, that's an issue, and that's a concern for those people. But we don't have to worry about this one anymore.
Any chance whatsoever that this could be brought up in some different form or fashion, or maybe another angle to bring it back to life again?
I don't think so. On February 10, just before we spoke last time, the U.S. House passed a bill that would have delayed the effective date until January 1, 2026, and that passed 408 to 0. Now think of that one. How unpopular must something be to get this current House, everybody to agree on something? Think that through. That's how disliked these rules are, where you have every single member of the House, except 27 that didn't vote, all agree. 408 to 0. I don't see this coming back at all. Not in the Trump administration. That's not going to happen. He'd veto it anyway, like he did the first time. So this is dead. Unless you're a foreign company that's registered domestically, don't worry about it.
All right, let's move on. And this one has and will continue to have a broad sweeping decision-making taking place, the Administrative Agency Deference. And you have made several references to that, and I've heard several references to that in other places as well, but a very important decision that took place in 2024.
That's right. Chevron deference is dead, and that we'll explain that here in a moment, but many people maybe over the years have heard me talking about this. One of the first things I did when I started out in Kansas over 30 years ago, in the 1990s, property rights issues were very, very big, and they're still big. But that was huge in the 1990s, and we had a trilogy of U.S. Supreme Court cases in the 1980s from the U.S. Supreme Court that dealt with significant property rights issues. And behind the scenes in all of this was a 1984 decision in the U.S. Supreme Court that set forth the standard that courts were to use when determining whether a federal government administrative agency rulemaking, whether a particular rule comported with the governing statute. And what Chevron, that's the name of a case, what Chevron deference meant was that if the federal administrative agency came basically close to what congressional intent was, in other words, if it was a reasonable interpretation of an ambiguous statute, then the agency would win. Well, we saw the numbers with respect to, say, USDA administrative appeals, and if you lost in the administrative process, you were very likely to lose. Over 90% of the time was what some of the research indicated. You're going to lose in court because you're stuck with that standard of extremely high deference, a very low hurdle, the other way to look at it, for the agency to cross, and a very high hurdle for anybody challenging that rule to cross that threshold to show that, what the agency did was arbitrary and capricious. Well, that came to an end in 2024. That's standard in a decision known as Loper-Bright. And it overruled Chevron. The court said, 40 years ago, we got this wrong. And they're not deferring. The court is not deferring to an agency's interpretation of a permissible construction anymore. So they've eliminated that high deferential standard, and it's the courts that will determine whether that particular rule at issue comports with the governing statute. So we call this Skidmore deference. It is a lower deferential standard that allows courts to utilize judicial review to protect afflicted parties' due process rights by weighing those due process rights against the government's interest in what I would call a technocratic independence from the political and legal process. So lower agency deference, it'll be a higher win rate for people that are challenging federal government administrative agencies. And I would add, Greg, real quickly, that there were actually two other cases decided by the Supreme Court that also bear on this issue, too, of administrative deference. One of those, this is the Corner Post decision, which has to do with the statute of limitations. And the rule used to be that if Congress passed a law a number of years ago, and it took the administrative agencies, quite some time, let's say 10 years, to apply it to you, well, you couldn't challenge it because you were timed out under the statute. Well, they changed that, and they said, no, the statute of limitations on these types of situations doesn't begin to run until that regulation has been applied to you. That's huge in terms of its impact on agricultural activities. That'll have significant implications for administrative law. That is a pivotal shift, as is the Loper-Bright decision in how and when federal regulations can be contested. And I think that'll reshape the landscape of administrative law and regulatory practice in the U.S. That's monumental. Those two cases together, and there was a third one that I won't mention, absolutely monumental in a sea change shift in the way the courts will look at administrative agency actions.
Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, is our guest as we're reviewing the top 3 of the top 10 of the ag law and tax issues for 2024. And number 1, Roger, I don't think any surprise here. Of course, it is what we see as far as the 2024 federal election that occurred in November.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a huge election, and we're seeing how big and how important that is already playing out with the rapid pace of what's been taking place. But the Republicans kept the House. They got a slight advantage. They retained a slight advantage there, regained the Senate with a greater majority than what they have in the House, retook the White House. And, of course, the talk last fall at all of my tax seminars is, well, if Trump doesn't win, what's going to happen on the tax side of things? And if he wins, what happens on the tax side? But I think with that makeup now and the ability to do, you don't have the 60 votes in the Senate, which means tax legislation is going to have to go through reconciliation, and they're already talking about that. We've got a framework that has passed the House in terms of how much spending would be allocated with respect to tax cuts, and we've got a budget bill that's got to be done this week. Friday's the deadline on that one. Then they can really lay out the framework for the legislation for the framework that the president has put forth concerning tax policy going forward. But had the Democrats swept, substantial tax increases were anticipated along the lines of a Senator Warren wealth tax or a Biden millionaire tax, which would have gone to the Supreme Court and given a court decision in 2024. The court in a footnote in that one said, don't bring that to us because we don't like those. Those are unconstitutional, the millionaire tax or the wealth tax. And it's that wealth tax that really scares farmers a lot because of the low basis in a lot of farm assets and the increase in value of farmland since it's been obtained by farmers. So that low basis, high value, and the ability to tax that or the attempt to tax that without any type of disposition, which is what or sale of the property, which is what Senator Warren was after. The Supreme Court said, no, we're not blessing that. In the one case that they had. But all of that seems assured not to occur now, at least not for the next 4 years. And I think it's unlikely that significant new taxes will be imposed, and tax cuts will be possible since the Republicans won the House, and you go through the reconciliation process. So it'll be bloody, and a lot of things have been bloody. But the election was transformative. Trump was a transformational candidate, and we're seeing that transformation take place. And some of us have been saying for some time, you've got to do something about this debt. We're at $36 trillion. That is not sustainable. That's going to drive the country into a hole that we can't get out of unless somebody has the courage to take it head on. And that's what we're seeing happening right now.
And as we are almost 2+ months into 2025, I'm sure that there are many issues that you're keeping an eye on throughout 2025 that are going to pop up throughout the year.
Yeah. What's going to happen with what's going on in the poultry industry? There are a whole bunch of legal implications that really aren't being talked about with respect to that. I expect with respect to the flu problem I'm referencing, I anticipate that's going to surface in the courts perhaps in 2025. We've got that issue. We've got further issues on the constitutional side of things with respect to, and I'm about to release a big article, and Greg, I'll be on RFD TV tomorrow on Cow Guy Close talking about what are the issues here, and how are the courts looking at what the government is doing from a constitutional standpoint in terms of which branch of government really controls the administrative state in this country. And I've got a big article. Hopefully today I'll have that out, but I'll be talking about that on TV tomorrow with Scott Shellady. And that's a big issue. That we've got numerous court opinions out, many court opinions out there, and they're all over the board, depending on the particular politics of the judge involved, which is another story for another day. That's going to be a big issue because that goes to the whole point of how do you trim down government and who's in control of the administrative state, and then of course fitting into that would be tariffs. And that's going to be another issue in 2025 because really, and I'll explain this in my article, the whole tariff issue fits into the downsizing of government. And I know we're out of time, but I would just direct people to the article once I get it up. You may not see the connection, but there is a distinct connection between what the president is trying to do with tariffs and the downsizing of government and getting things right-sized again. So it's going to be an interesting year. There's never a shortage of things for me to write about or talk about, that's for sure.
Well, obviously that'll be a discussion for next Monday that will take place. But if people want to see that once you post it, where can they find that at?
Well, that article, I'll go to my Substack, and that's going to be for subscribers on my Substack. I may spin out little pieces here and there or do short videos, commentary on that. I've got a video I'll do later today, but that's on tax, and I do that on the Substack side of things because it's tax season, so I get little vignettes out on that. But I'll do pieces here and there, and you and I can talk about it. I'll make sure that you get to see that, and we can do future shows on that because that's really that. Agriculture is really interested in what's going on at the federal level. It'll have an impact. All of these government agencies in the attempt to trim the fat out, that'll have an impact. And of course, the tariff discussion fits in that. So we'll talk about it in the future.
All right, sounds good. Roger, as always, appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you, Greg. You too.
That is Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the Ag Issues program here on 580 WIBW.